All good? All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Sorry, I'm a little off center of my camera. I am on my iPad right now, so it may look a little weird, but just know I'm looking and present and really excited to be here with you. So I'm going to share my screen. And can you see that okay?
That looks great.
Awesome. So my name is Taylor Griffith. I'm a photographer, an artist, an ocean advocate, and like many of you, I love kelp. Um, Here is an old photo of me up in Monterey Bay, holding some algae with my brother and my mother. I was introduced to the ocean at a really young age. My grandmother is a marine biologist, and my parents build underwater robotics and submersible systems. So from day one, the ocean has always been there, a part of my life. And in seeing that, like many of you, I'm sure you've seen changes happening to it throughout the years. And the first big change I really witnessed was the demise of the sea stars along our coast, probably about 10 years ago now. And I grew up down in Monterey a lot. I was fortunate enough when I was really young to be able to go down in submersibles and see what was living below the waves there, anywhere from 100 feet down to about 400, 500 feet. And all along the way, it was amazing sea stars. And then when I was returning to Monterey, seeing the sort of starfish wasting disease, which was really affecting them, and suddenly there were no more sea stars there. The rocks were devoid of the beautiful colors of the ochre stars and the bat stars. And that really was jarring to me. And I wanted to learn more and figure out what was happening. And then I really fell in love with photography. That was what really brought me one of those things I was really fell in love with and felt that I could uh, use to make people aware of what was happening to the oceans. And in 2016, when I was working on my undergraduate photography degree, I had the opportunity to go and dive in these submersibles off of the coast of Hawaii. So the one on the left is Pisces 4, and on the right is Pisces 5. And we were diving off the coast of Molokai to look at deep water coral beds. And I had with me a ultra low light camera, which records up to 4 million ISO. You can essentially see in the dark with this camera. It's crazy what it allowed us to do. And in the 70s, my grandmother had actually been in these coral beds walking in a giant pressurized spacesuit looking thing. It was called the gym suit. And she was able to see this bioluminescent coral, but she was never able to really document it. She could only document it through words and through observations, but never share that image. So when we had the opportunity to go back, we took this camera with us that would allow us to share these images with a wider audience. So I'm just going to play a little clip of that for you here. So this was shot from inside Pisces 4, looking at Pisces 5. And there is the bioluminescent coral. So the sub operators, there are two 3-person submersibles. So the sub operator was running the manipulator arm to stimulate the coral while I'm sitting in the pilot seat. He's sitting at where I was usually sitting because the pilot seat has the best viewport to look out of. So it was underwater gymnastics to make these shots happen. But what you're seeing is just the individual polyps, the bioluminesce. This is shot using natural light in about 14 to 1500 feet of water. And this was the first time that this phenomenon had ever been documented. And one of the really great things about having this footage was usually you're just looking through these tiny little portholes making observations. But having this footage, it allowed the scientists on board to go back and really study how light was traveling across these animals. And what we actually found out, they always thought that it was just a single linear pattern from where the coral was stimulated, that it would move in both directions up and down the stalk. But in looking at the footage, what we were able to figure out is that it actually was working more of like a network of communication. Um, so from where the coral was stimulated, then it would keep going from there, and where the lights would then collide into one another, they would sort of bounce back, and then new points would start emitting light, and that would be the origin for it. And don't worry, we were taking a sample there. That's why that one was broken off. So then that was where I really found that images and storytelling had a lot of power to show people things that they had never seen before, and that using technology to find these amazing things about the ocean that we could then bring back and share. And this was in 2020, the bioluminescence up in Malibu. Ever since then, I've always just been on a quest to find more and more bioluminescence because it's endlessly enchanting to me just watching that electric blue glow. And then going back into the kelp now, this was Point Lobos in 2015. So when I was certified as a scuba diver, it was mostly in Northern California and up and diving in the kelp there, and just seeing the wondrous magic place that Point Lobos is. And then in 2021, I went back. I'm sorry, that's out of order. Yeah, 2021, I went back, and this is how it looked. It was completely overrun by the purple sea urchins. And that was sort of the second big change that I had witnessed firsthand, and seeing the loss of that forest ecosystem. And that's what set me down the path of really investigating kelp forests off the California coast. So the primary ones I was working with at that time and through now were off the coast of Southern California. So mainly San Pedro and the Channel Islands. So these are just some images of places where I was visiting and really just falling in love with the coastline. And so then we're getting into a little bit of the art. This was the final group show for my MFA cohort. Here in front, you have some cyanotypes of Macrocystis, and in the back, you have some ghost lobster traps that I recovered from the coast of Palos Verdes and San Pedro. Some detail shots of them. This is called structural collapse. It's looking at the extraction of the lobsters, those apex predators in the ecosystem, and what that was doing, how that was doing damage, as well as the actual physical objects of the traps when they're lost, getting thrashed up onto the shoreline and destroying the kelp forests as they're rattling around down there like bulldozers. So taking them out and really looking at them as objects that all started identical and looking the same, and then getting crushed and manipulated by the forces of the ocean to turn them into these unique objects. And here's the image of the Macrocystis piece. So this is cyanotype on canvas, individual pieces that were exposed and then re-stitched together using hognose rings, which is how hognose rings are those little metal rings which are used to assemble and attach things onto the lobster traps. So exploring that relationship of this industrial object, which is usually used for like repairing chain link fences and fishing gear, and using it in an artistic setting. And here, this is probably about 18 by 24 inches. You can see the little push pins up there. That first cyanotype piece really set me down this path of trying to figure out how I can really make images that convey the scale and the beauty of kelp forests on canvas. I love making cyanotypes, but one of the biggest things I found was I was really limited by the size and the scale that I could work in. Usually it's done on paper, And I thought, like, if there's a way I can get this stuff onto canvas, I can really uh, shift the scale for in a very inexpensive manner. A roll of canvas will cost you a couple $100, whereas a big sheet of paper the size of like a piece of macrocystis or the feather boa kelp would probably be like $800 a sheet. Um, so I worked for about 3 months to develop a process that would allow me to get really crisp, sharp images onto canvas. And that is what you're looking at here. These are sort of process images of coating the canvas and exposing it with specimens on top. This is the Petrographia californica kelp, and here's one of the feather boa kelp. So these are the ones that I've been making through the time in my residency down at AltaSea. I have a little studio space set up there where I have a darkroom tent where I can coat the canvas and then go and collect the algae from the coastline, bring it in, and lay it on top in the dark and just drag them outside to be exposed. So this is an image of the show that's currently up down at Angels Gate Cultural Center. Like Emma said, it's up through the 10th. And it's a two-person show with me and Nancy Wu, who's a poet from Long Beach. And it sort of worked out really well because she's focused on the land where I'm focused on the ocean. Um, and this is through a program called Artists at Work, which is run by a group from New York. And they have 16 artists across LA County working with 8 cultural institutions. And as an Artist at Work fellow, you pick a nonprofit to work with for the year-long term. And it's really about engaging the community through artistic practice. So here are just these 3 types. These cyanotypes are part of a larger project I'm working on. That's part of making an herbarium of all the different kelp along the Southern California coast. So on the left, we have juvenile Laminaria farloi, and then the Petrographia californica in the middle. And then over on the right, the amazing, wonderful worldwide macrocystis. And then here we have another lobster trap sculpture. This one, I actually put lobster molts inside of that I collected off the coastline. And this piece up on the wall was made using ghost net that I recovered on a dive out in the Channel Islands. And just looking at different types of material and how that can work with the algae and with the ghost gear to really try and paint this holistic picture of what's happening in the kelp forests off our coast. And here's a much wider view up in the top, those sculptures that you're seeing there. This was a community sculpture. So I held a series of workshops over this past year where people, kids, adults, people of all ages would come in and work with found ocean plastics from the coastline to make these quote unquote little lures. And these lures are representative of a long line. So this sculpture is about 30 feet long, and approximately every foot, there's one of these little lure sculptures, and that's representative of long lines, which can be up to 30 miles long out in the ocean. And every single foot of those 30 miles, there's baited hooks that really fish and extract in a very indiscriminate manner. So you have heavy amounts of bycatch, you have dolphins, birds, non-target species, sharks that come up and get hooked and die on these lines. And even though it's banned off the coast of California to use these, we still import a large amount of seafood, which is caught in these methods from other countries. On the left-hand side, you have what I call the Kelp Forest studies, and these are all shot in the Channel Islands this year. So Anacapa, Santa Rosa, and Catalina Island. And in the top left there, you have an amazing little fish aggregation with that beautiful kelp bass. Top middle is a macrocystis and some bad visibility. But I like the ethereal nature that it produces. And then a Garibaldi on the right, some views of the kelp forest along the middle. In the bottom left, there's another image of an urchin baron off the coast of Anacapa Island. There's a ghost lobster trap that was actually inside a marine protected area in the bottom middle, and then a beautiful Gorgonian on the bottom right. So these are just studies that were shot on 35 millimeter film using old Nikonos 5 cameras and black and white film that then I brought back and developed and processed and scanned all myself, these prints. And just a couple close-ups. This is that Gorgonian. It was covered in amazing brittle stars that reminded me of the oil rigs and diving those off the coast. Just hundreds and hundreds of brittle stars and anemones. Just it's like a carpet along the bottom. Here is some more macrocystis. Again, not really good visibility, but on film, it creates this very ethereal nature and sort of this misty forest look to it. And I love the fact or the idea of kelp forest is changing how light works underwater because it is like this forest canopy full of life. And up in the top, it's very bright and sunny. And as you descend, it rapidly drops off in terms of luminosity. Just another great fish aggregation here. Little Garibaldi hanging out and guarding a piece of macrocystis. If you've ever dove with Garibaldi, you know how territorial, but also how funny a fish they are, and a beautiful bright orange, just like my scuba fins. Here's the ghost trap again along the sort of carpeted brittle star seabed, and there are all sorts of things growing on this. It had definitely been out there for a while and made sure that the release doors were open so it would not continue to capture and kill animals. And then Macrocystis forest. This one's off Anacapa. And that amazing kelp bass, such funny, curious fish. And then the top where the light is just breaching the surface and the fish are all hanging out up there. So then, this is going to be a sort of drastic transition. But from the kelp forests in California, now we're going to take a look at some of the rarest kelp in the world off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. And this was an expedition that we did in July off of the MV Argo, which is usually up on Cocos Island. But I got invited to go on this scientific expedition that was looking for lost species in the Galapagos Islands. And we hit most every island from Darwin and Wolf, where there were whale sharks and schools of hammerheads, all the way to Fernandina and Isabella, which is more of where we were looking for the kelp. The Galapagos is an amazing place in that those two northern islands are tropical and there's coral reefs all over the place. You get whale sharks that come through, parrotfish, and then a day's journey south, you're basically in cold, nutrient-rich water, which is coming up from Antarctica. So two wholly different types of diving, one day apart. And in this southern area of the archipelago, back in the 1930s, they discovered Asenia galapagensia. I believe I'm saying that right. Which is an endemic species of kelp to the southern Galapagos Islands. It's found right off the coast of Cabo Douglas. And that's really the only area where it's been seen, discovered, and there's been multiple times where they thought it was extinct. So my grandmother was actually on an expedition in the 1970s, which went and sort of rediscovered the kelp after it had first been seen in the 1930s. And then there was a El Nino event which happened, and they thought that the kelp had gone wholly extinct because no one could find it anywhere. And then in the mid 2000s, it was rediscovered on another scientific expedition, and they got some images, some samples, brought them back, and then another El Nino event happens, and then no one could find it again. So part of our mission this summer was to go back and find the kelp forests. So we went and jumped in off the coast of Cabo Douglas, and descended to about 125 feet. And lo and behold, we found this amazing forest of algae, red algae, brown algae, green algae. You can see the little sea turtle up there in the corner. Sorry, the dogs are being crazy. Oreo. Sorry. And lo and behold, we did find the kelp. And so here it is. You can see it right there. It's not too big. It's a very short, it's this sort of understory species that, well, there's no real canopy forming species down there, but it would be primarily what we would see as like an understory species in the giant kelp forests off our coast. And there's a image, it's right there in the center. You can see that it's bifurcated, sort of like how elkhorn kelp is off the coast here. But instead of being a rounded blade, it's actually, or sorry, rounded stalk, it's actually sort of like a knife edge. It starts round and then comes to a very sharp point. So this was about 120 feet of water. And we dove this at about 10 o'clock in the morning. And so you can see how much light is down there, which is really interesting to find kelp growing this deep. And it's very much due to this area, and there's a lot of light coming in, and there's high surge. And I'll pull up here in a second a video that'll show you how surgy and currency it is this deep. And the theory is around this that it needs these areas of high motion, high exchange to keep its blades moving and exposed to as much sunlight as possible. You can see all sort of the associated species of algae around it too. And down here, just at this one site, we didn't find too dense a population of the kelp. It was more so sporadic specimens here and there, but nothing really dense and lush. So that was a great success at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then that afternoon, we went down in a little submersible called the Deep Sea. So this is me and the kelp researcher on the right, Salome Buglas from Charles Darwin Foundation and University of British Columbia, who is the primary investigator around the Galapagos kelp. And she actually believes she's discovered a new species of kelp over in the Western Galapagos Islands. It looks totally different from the Asenia galapagensia. And so part of this was going down to collect samples so she can compare the genetics against the new species that she thinks she's found. So those results should hopefully be coming out in a few months. And our amazing sub-pilot, Uval, wonderful, wonderful pilot who has captured these images that I'm going to share with you here. And this is the bottom of the seamount that we started on. Sorry, there should not be a sound to that, but that's just the sound of the pan and tilt moving on the submarine. But these are deep water black corals. We're in about 200 meters here on an underwater seamount, also off the coast of Cabo Douglas. And this is probably one of the most amazing places I've ever had the chance to witness firsthand. Just the density of life, the diversity of life, every inch of everything is covered. I'm just going to let it play and let you all enjoy it as we're moving along the mountain. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted that to go away there. And even this deep down, you can see all the red coralline algae that's covering the rocks here. Amazing little starfishes, and up in the top, there's that yellow sponge and then a massive sponge with the orange starfish next to it there. It was just this amazing, lush side of the seamount. And it's interesting because this area that we were in, this seamount, is in the direct path of the Cromwell Current, which is coming out of Antarctica. So there's just an abundance of nutrients that's getting deposited right here.
I actually like the noise of the panic.
I mean, it's great. You don't hear it when you're in the sub, but on the playback you do. On the inside of the sub, if you could hear what we were saying to each other, was a lot of just gasps and like, this is insane. None of us had ever seen anything like it, and Uval has done a few hundred sub dives, and he said this was the absolute best one that he had ever been on. More corals and algae and sponges. Just truly a amazing place. And I'm waiting for one part to come here. I don't know if you saw in the bottom left-hand corner, we're sort of transitioning, we're in this transitional zone between the deep water black corals and gorgonians. So this mountain, this underwater mountain was really striated with life. So it was a lot of coral at the base where we started. It was a lot of sand and then moved up into coral. And then up where we are now, it's starting to transition to having some gorgonians as well. Yeah, here's what I was waiting for. To see the, like, just insane how much life is packed into this one little area. We nicknamed this place the Garden of Eden just because of how much diversity there was in one little area. And then when we kept moving up the seamount, I'm just going to skip forward here, we found an amazing.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. There shouldn't be audio to that one either. I wonder if I can mute it so I have to talk over, or I'll just let it play. But I shot this from the inside of the bubble, and this was an entire lush forest of Asenia galapagensea at the top of the seamount. And this was in about, the kelp started at about 90 or so meters, 80 to 90 meters, and went all the way up to 19 meters. So well within scuba diver depths.
Go ahead.
There it comes.
We
He's fully
are.
checking
It's
us
on.
out.
It's on. We are good here. We are not moving.
Okay, good Mike. Come on, come into my kelp shop. This is a big bull. Oh my god, yes.
Wow!
Wow.
No way. I think I have it on the camera as well.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
it comes from the right. Another one. No way.
Hello. Yes. They like the kelp forest, they like us.
So yeah, that was amazing. You can hear just we're sort of gobsmacked by how much life was down here, and this giant aggregation of fish. They're called Creole fish. They're sort of the really common species found throughout the islands. They're all over the place and saw them on every dive. But this was the biggest aggregation that we had seen in one spot. And with that, I encourage you to go check out the show. And I always wanted to leave an ample amount of time for questions because I know I sort of blew through that very, very fast, but I know that it tends to open up a lot of room for questions and discussion. And to fully be blunt, I hate just talking to people. I rather have discussion and keep that sort of energy going and allow for collaboration to bloom from that. So if you want to
Go
find
ahead.
more about me, this is my website, taylorgriffithphoto.com, and Instagram at 510tay. All of that footage from the Galapagos is going to be used on a new video piece that's dealing with the above part of the water and the below, and sort of creating a visual representation of how much just on the surface we see one way, but as we go below the surface, everything changes and you move 10 feet and it's a completely different world. So that's going to be shown in Los Angeles next summer at a gallery in downtown. So keep an eye out for that if you want to come and say hi. There's some new low light footage of bioluminescent plankton that we saw in about 300 meters off the Galapagos. And I'm really excited, and that's the next big show. So with that, I guess I'll open it up to questions, comments, concerns,